So we're in new terrain here. I want to talk about capitalism, post-war consciousness, even Cold War consciousness. And I think the term Cold War is very crucial from a deep space and deep time perspective, because what we're looking at is the change of the terrain of the way that consciousness functions, presents itself, and co-occurs with and within modernity as a historical phenomenon. And by modernity, I mean the bridge between 1900 and 1999 into the 2000s, with the personal computational device, the internet, social media, artificial intelligence. So what we're really mapping is we're mapping a technological revolution, a hyper extended epochal technological revolution, which is accelerating en masse, going so far back as the photograph and the light bulb. And the reason why I call those two inventions into play here is that they are technologies of perception. And so really what we're dealing with when we're dealing with the human species is a revelation and revolution of perception. And this is the historical overturning, which we would call historically revolutions politically, as in attempts to liberate societies from certain dogmatic and class-based and racially stratified conditions, which is to say hierarchies of information. Right? This is when I say empire and empirical, they really mean the same thing, just as much as when I say culture, I mean bacterial and the image-based semiotics of the human being. This is a multivalent perspective, and we're tapping into the real linguistic substratum of existence as elucidated by Wittgenstein as a part of this epoch, right? There's a great book title for the philosophy of Wittgenstein and the Life and Times. It's Philosophy in the Age of the Airplane. And I think it's so fitting, and it's just been circulating in my mind because we're looking at the relationship between techne, as in technological prosthetic, which is ultimately linguistic. We're looking at that in relationship to language itself, which is the way that being or consciousness is communicating itself, whether that's genetically or through radiation or through culture. And then we are also looking at the radicalizing relationship between the two of those factors, which is to say how the genetic information of the human being influences its linguistic interface with reality or existence, which is to say its synaptic and neurological architecture. But then also, this is a two-way street of information transmission. How that cultural unfolding in a biological perspective reflects itself back upon the gradient of nature itself, and thus is in a process of perennial revolution through revelation. You understand this? This is through light, this is through cultural artifact, and this is through the exponential estrangement, as in the high strangeness as the sublime quality of the revelation of the Frankensteinian nature of the human being, as we elucidated in the last essay here and then the last oration. How this progresses through modernity as what I will call the real underpinning and underlying essence of capitalism, which is to say estrangement. It is the fracturing and fragmentation of an organic, which is to say a human or a natural or a biotic, as in a biome, interrelationship with nature rapidly and exponentially into multifactorial technological prosthetics, which are explosions of the symbolic chain of information in space and time. This is a revolution which far surpasses the formerly possible within glacial natural evolution of biology and the relatively predictable historical cycles of tribal warfare private cosmologies and localized and regionalized forms of consciousness, which extend as far as the eye can see, or the horse can travel, or the wooden ship can travel. So this is all, again, it goes back to compression of space-time. Condensation and compression and distillation of space-time, bridging the formerly linear, structured Newtonian grounded paradigm of physical information, which is native to the human condition, as in its genetic limitations as a physical body in space and in time. This is being bridged by everything from the airplane to the computer. And so when and as this happens, you have the high strangeness of the consciousness within the human body and as the human body, as in its genetic architecture, leaping out from its domain, much as in the way of a caged lion or a caged panther, in its hyper-accelerating human evolution first and before human evolution itself can register this progressive exponential revelation at the realm of the literal genome, the language of the body. So you have this domain, this dormant architecture of the ape, this native and latent and slow-moving grand historical genetic current, which is deeply allied to the cosmological unfolding of the universe itself. So this is one domain of time, if you can understand this. This is a domain of time which functions as a slow-moving process of the development of technology. So this is genetic language. And when you have the added scaffolding of cultural language, which breaks the ground, the dormant, latent, subconscious ground beneath the Newtonian, which is to say the phenomenal and the phenomenological, the appearance of things as they are, into the real architecture, which is much like code breaking, as we've discussed here. Into the real architecture of nature itself, what you have is a firm break from human history into a superstructural history, which then is reflective and refractive down upon the human being as a making strange. So now you have an ape, so to speak, with a cybernetic or technological prosthetic, which is changing actively that ape's consciousness through a reprogramming. It's a systems update in which the hardware itself, which is to say the operating system of the genetic as a language or a linguistic, is being terraformed by the epigenetic encounter with this high technology, which is refractory and reflective upon. It's the literalization of the forebrain capacity, as in the dialectical redoubling of the human being back upon nature, and what is essentially the rending apart of the human being's source code to reveal its quantum and particulate status in nature. And as such, and as so, rearranging it creatively. And this is the foundation of scientific work on the genome, cloning, right? Splitting of the atom. These are all ways of tearing at and rending the codex of nature, where it appears to be this narratological stream. It is in reality a series or an alphabet or a binary code, as in breaking down the genetic and cellular structure of an organism. So this is a destruction and deconstruction, which is inherent in the emergent principles of postmodernism as the 1900s advance. This, so that you understand the movement of culture, philosophy, and the concepts and aspects of relational and relative history of the human mind. The realities of science and history mirror this consciousness evolution, because this is an unfolding which permeates every disciplinary architecture and structure and reveals them to be one large compound, which is to say this progressive revelation. And what has happened, again, as we discussed the schizophrenic dislocation of human consciousness at the onset of modernity, and we discussed how that occurs through the symbolic chain, as in the creation of a linguistic. the creation of a representative form of language, which for Wittgenstein is the problem, and it's a nonsense problem. It's an impossible problem and insoluble. But I'm suggesting a level deeper here in terms of looking at the linguistics of the genome, as well as the linguistics of the phenomenological construction of space-time as in the waveform. And I'm saying that this is not so much an insoluble problem as in a real-time code breaking of the architecture which constructs the appearance of language, which is the nature of that, which is it's the energetic waveform beneath the architectural appearance of the structural language, which would be the letter R, as in the literal appearance of a cliff's face or a mountaintop. And that within itself is a informational status. It has a body of information. It's an architecture of density. It itself, in the waveform sense, is speaking actively in space and time as a temporary architecture of information, which is carrying form as such, as in the letter. So when we witness capitalism as a structure. This is a body, an ideological body, which is in many ways, fascinatingly enough, built to hold the sublime insanity and absurdity of the ape with its finger on the trigger of the atom bomb. And I'll explain why. Is that you look at capitalism, it is willing to accommodate, appropriate, consume, and reproduce anything and everything into the architecture of language, value, meaning, and propriety, which is to say capital. It's to subsume all things within the language of value. And this has to be mutually agreed upon. We're looking at the creation of an entirely human system, which is to say the insulation of the human being post-rupture, post-symbolic rupture of modernity, insulating itself from the natural reality of its own existence and creating a fantastical, phantasmagoric realm of illusion and imagination. And this is something that Singh talks about in terms of the architecture of the venture capitalist. And the idea is always already the fantastical proposal of a fantastical origin or source or phenomenon which must be discovered, and as such is advanced the literal moving power, the engine power of capital to process this initiative, which promises this material phenomenological return or status of the subject within the architecture of modernity itself, as in a scaffolding of a class system based around the creation of a currency, right? And so when we talk about currency, there's again a double meaning, as in currency as in literal movement of energy or an electric current, which of course has outlets. It's a process and a function of movement. Just as to say the movement of currency as in the US dollar, or even now Bitcoin, as a further elucidation of the abstraction of this absurdity. And a further manifestation of the symbolic chain into total abstraction, which is to say it does not even exist, but in the collective agreement that it does. And this is what's so powerful about modernity, and what is so struggled with in postmodernism, and Wittgenstein really as one of the first great postmodernists, is that there's this metaphorical throwing up of the hands to the absurdity of what has unfolded here, and a surrendering to the break which has occurred between the real linguistic status of the genetic architecture of the human being and the grand cosmological molasses-like glacial evolution of species, and evolution of the natural organic linguistic of the cosmos, which is recombinatory and unconscious and occurring within space-time interactions with materials, that the human being has folded over hyperspace and allowed for and created this synaptic metabolic architecture of being through technology, through the waveform and the light form. This is what you see here with both photography and the digital screen. It's a progressive exponential growth, as in a deepening of the speed of the outcropping of information, and thus the complexity and perplexity of that information. And this is the function of modernity's genius, right? Because it has spun out of the linear time, which is the interlocking gears of the grand cosmic, whether that's the solar system, whether that's the evolution of the human being, whether that's the progressive unfolding of the universe as a historical process which occurs over millions of years. And this is a compression and condensation of space-time into the technological artifact which seeks to actively resolve the human being question and problem, which is to compress and condense space-time down into one artifactual object, which is the singularity, which becomes a point, and then beneath that point, a nothingness, because it's theoretical. And so this is what I mean, and the baseball card is a great example. So I've included this 1955 Bowman salesman Johnny Logan hand-cut baseball card. It's on the back of it, it's the salesman's advertisement. Maybe I'll get into that later, but we'll see. The idea here with the baseball card is it's so deeply allied to the invention of the computational device as in a digital screen of light beam information, pixelated information. This is what's being reproduced as in the printed image on the cardboard card. It is the taking of the wood of the tree and the projection of a profoundly democratic, even political, cultural information, which has no meaning outside of the aesthetic register of the civilization which has produced it. This is entirely internal. Everything from the name to the marketing to the statistics on the back of the baseball card to the team to the color television which is being represented here. This is an architecture entirely of the human being. It is a lapsing of the anthropological in upon itself and a refusal of nature. It's an active use of nature and a repurposing of nature for an utterly meaningless, outside of the human being context, cultural construct. And this is what capitalism excels. And this is where capitalism is such a powerful mirror, reflectory and refractory of modernity, because it is the leaving of the human being of and from nature. And this is something that is protested and rebelled, but it is a consciousness phenomenon. And this is why it is rarely, if ever, protested and rebelled successfully, because the human being itself has achieved this hyperspace of nihilism in relationship to the human being form, in relationship to the natural and the cosmological. It is a refusal of the universal, and as such is a nihilistic inversion of the organic, which is to say the genetic reality or the linguistic of the cosmos, and a repurposing down to the atomic. Again, postmodernism and the atom bomb are simultaneous. As well as absurdism, again, with Samuel Beckett in particular, Edward Albee. This is a theatrical phenomenon, and the theater itself at this period of time and this juncture. Bruce Conner's advanced experiential and experimental film work also elucidates this. It is a advanced disjuncture in the meaning and being and time which has refused truth. It has refused the real and seeded into this quantum mechanical observer-based phenomenon of the utter ungroundedness and ungravity which is inherent to the linguistic of the cosmos. It's a process or a code system which, once cracked, seeds into the absurdity of a binary system of the development and stratification and appearance of information, which trickles itself down directly into the current cultural and civilizational fundamental issues, which revolve primarily around the relationship of truth and reality, as in what is happening, why it's happening, how it is occurring. And this has seeded entirely into an information overload, which is to say a motherboard or a systems overload, which is rapidly and actively producing human being trauma. It's a mass unfolding of the ungrounding of the human being from the genetic linguistic conditions of the being body in space and in time, which is to say the senses, which is to say the nervous system, which is to say the synapses of the brain. And it is throwing the human being actively into the void of the breakdown and disjection of Newtonian information, which grounds the human being nervous system in reality as a repetitive synaptic architecture of the movement of the cosmos, the movement of the solar system. This is again, as I've described it previously, a somnambulism. It's a rhythm of history and being in time which grounds the human being in a sense of being wrapped within the blanket of the cosmos. And this is what is required in many ways for the successful survival and reproduction of the human being. That human being has been thrown into a technological rending and mixing machine, as in the remix, and we could discuss this in terms of graffiti and the advent of hip-hop, that nature itself is being actively repurposed by the human being technology, which has reached into the bowel of nature and achieved and understood the recombinative construct and concept, which nature itself has always already been progressively understanding, and hyper-accelerated it through technological culture. And so you have these baseball cards which are being sold in packs in grocery stores, in convenience stores. This is an entirely aesthetic phenomenon of the creation of a grand symbolic chain of information, which includes company brands, which includes advertising and marketing for utterly irrelevant and meaningless things that contribute nothing but the sense of a human being, in the grand sense of a human being's civilizational architectural bubble, which insulates mankind from the absolute cosmological political realities, and instead creates a subsystem, a subspecies system of values, symbolic transactions and mediations, which in many, if not all ways, actively work against, as in a civilizational and death drive of modernity, actively work against the fundamental cosmological principles of life. And this has to be understood for that which it is, which is to say, it is a rejection of the Newtonian and a rearing of the bestial head of the quantum mechanical, as in the real organizing principles of the universe, which is a primordial chaos of vision, perception, construction. It is beneath the constructed and into the constructing as a creative phenomenon, as an imagination and an imagining. And so this is what is predicted and elucidated in Hegel as the end of history, and modernity itself is the end of history when we look at it from this clear light of a paradigmatic transaction and transformation. Because what modernity achieves is that hyperspace, and then progressively unfolding through the hyperspace of modernity is the advent and onset of increasing exponential dimensions and levels of absurdity which occur within the quote-unquote capitalist system, which is really nothing more than a way of labeling this consciousness-based experience. And this is a descent in many ways into absolute utter chaos and debasement, as in a sort of primordial hell, which is rending the human being from itself and revealing that which is beneath the human being. It is a spinning out of the mechanical architecture of the cosmos, everything from the genetic to the solar system, in the revelation of the creative phenomenon of that which constructs it and the tenuous thread of that which binds it, which is a temporal appearance of that which appears to be. And so in many ways you have this deathly nihilism of the meaning of the human being, which is so clearly described in the works of Samuel Beckett, the tearing apart of the cultural foundations in the works of Edward Albee, and the profound nihilistic effects of mass death in modern warfare. And so, much in the way of you have perhaps progressively into the 21st century, you have Melania Trump wearing a jacket that says, "I don't care, do you?" when she's going to visit an internment camp, for instance. We're also looking at the Holocaust. We're looking at fascism as a deeply modernist device, because this is what, just as much as the poets and the literary figures such as T.S. Eliot or Heidegger or Ezra Pound are actively grappling with, and they're elucidating it through a vision into the literary performance of modernity as a consciousness-based phenomenon, because this is a narrativology, a narratology of being. And it is a transformation which is occurring primarily, again, linguistically, as in a cultural artifact, which is the severance of the human being into progressive forms of abstraction, as in erasure, as in death. So this is a phenomenon. So when we talk about modernity and modernism, we're not talking about art. We're talking about consciousness. The art itself is just an outcropping and a symptom of this phenomenon. It's a description of the experience of this unfolding as it is occurring in real time. And so with Pound or with Heidegger, there's a lapsing into fascism as the resolution of this phenomenon, because the human being is attempting to assert control over this paradigm shift, which is utterly unprecedented in human being and human being history. And the fascistic alternative is to absolutely lock down, stratify, and codify human being relationship and behavior in an attempt to control something which has already spun out of control. It's a paradigm which has already ended, and now we're in this post-lapsarian mode of consciousness, which is the high strangeness of the code of nature being utterly untethered from organic meaning and being proper. And this is the realm of absolute and total absurdity, which spirals deeply and further into the 21st century with the advent of artificial intelligence, the concept of fake news. You have the human being itself, the very architecture, the nervous system architecture has been primarily and foundationally disrupted. But furthermore, it cannot locate itself within the modern world because the modern world does not exist. It's a theory of the mind which is actively terraforming and transforming the prior and formal natural order, all the way down to the biome and the biosphere of the earth and the human being body as in genetic information. This is an acceleration of the epigenetic phenomenon, which is latent and inherent within nature. So what I'm saying here is this is not new, but rather this is a hyper-acceleration as in a paradigm shift of the fundamental energetic transformation of the human being as a thermonuclear metabolic system of nesting doll information, which is being translated. It's being translated linguistically down through scales in a lossy file. But it is being hyper-accelerated, and there has been a paradigm shift as in a transformation, as in a revelation of that which is fundamentally, which again is the relationship between the quantum mechanical and the Newtonian as fields of perception and dimensions of perception, levels and layers of perception, where the articulation of nature and the natural itself seeds and recedes back into chaos and experimentation and the creative principle of that which produced it and is producing it. Again, this is the realm of dreams, the realm of artistry, and the realm of creativity. And this is what the human being is doing. It is tearing apart the root system of reality as it appears to be phenomenologically and repurposing the Newtonian in the name of the quantum mechanical, and thus absolutely disturbing the natural order and throwing it into the chaos which it is revealing beneath itself. This is a self-revelation. So that's what I got. I'll catch you on the next one.